Hi, Steve.
Hello there, David.
Hey. Sorry, there's a bit of a pregnant pause there. I hope everybody's all right about that.
Well,
Will you wait?
hopefully we've got a large number of participants.
Excellent.
So,
Yeah,
well, let's begin then. So,
great.
hello everybody that's hopefully watching this. My name's Steve Levine, and you're seeing me in my studio in Liverpool, and there is David Lowe, acclaimed composer, in his studio. You're watching an edition of In the Studio, hosted by the Ivors Academy. And as I mentioned, our guest today is David Lowe.
Hello.
So, David, shall we start, for those that may or may not be familiar with your background, a brief sort of potted history of how you got to the position you are today?
Yeah, well, I started, this almost reminds me of it because I started out, that's, not very good. There we
At the
go.
iPhone for you.
There, that's the iPhone. I think that's all right. Good. So I started out in radio, actually, in a very long time ago, in local radio at the BBC. I have a photo of me there.
Looks like Emperor Roscoe.
Yeah. So just while I was still at school in sixth form, I got helping out local radio at the weekend in Birmingham, and that's where I really got into sort of audio mixing and editing and sound and everything to do with creative, technical mix that sort of music is in a way, but it was just sound then. And I was doing music for fun, really, and I started making little jingles up when I was there, and then started experimenting, making some musical ones and stuff. So that was the very beginning, and I just worked my way through. Got a job as a sound recordist on the road, on location, but doing music for fun, and then everything converged one day when I was having a drink at the bar at the BBC, and this guy said, "Oh, you do music, don't you? I need some music for our local news show. Do you want to have a go at doing something?" And I just went, "Oh, yeah."
So that was that the very first kind of paid commission, or?
That was the very first paid commission. It was for Midlands Today in, I've got it here somewhere, in 1983 it was. So this is BBC. Very low quality recording. It was all done on a Juno 6.
I was going to ask you because obviously many of the people watching this almost certainly studios. So let's have a quick look at your current studio. And I notice also in the corner there's a Tascam 4-track for the older viewers. So give us a brief overview of your gear.
So this is the Juno, which was my very first synth. And not even MIDI connect on it. There's no MIDI in and out. So had a sequencer in it, and you could actually sort of sync it up with a drum machine with I can't even remember how it worked actually, but it was like a sound pulse thing that you plugged in.
So those early ones used to use clock pulses. Yeah, so the arpeggio from the back. So I used to have one of those as well. Yeah, at the back of it, you've got like a 16s pulse that you can put in.
Yeah.
Internally.
So it was pre-MIDI and pre-sync. Apart from that, but it's a brilliant sound, and it still sounds amazing now. Actually, really fat analog sounds that you can get, and very easy to control. And it's actually that's not my original one. I sold the original one, but I got this one a few years ago because I thought it'd be really nice to get some of the old kit back again. So, and then the next step was this gorgeous little machine here, which
we all had one of those. That really revolutionized bedroom recording, didn't it?
It was incredible. It was amazing. It really did open the floodgates for me. I remember
for those that are not familiar with that, essentially Tascam brought out a cassette-based format, but it ran at twice the normal speed of a regular cassette.
That's right.
And it used effectively the left and right side of track one was track 1 and 2, but it also in parallel used what would have been flipping the cassette over to give you track 3 and 4. So you could effectively record 4 separate things, and because the tape speed was faster than a regular cassette, the quality was pretty good. In fact, I got my very first publishing deal based on demos that were recorded on the very same machine.
I mean, the quality, listen back to some of the recordings now, it actually is pretty good.
And you're absolutely right. And in fact, funnily enough, things have gone full circle now. And I've just downloaded a library, a lo-fi library, where they've taken modern sounds and used those machines to create a kind of crunchy tone. Because in this, clean digital world, the colours that machine produces are very desirable.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure. I think the heads have gone on it a bit now for me, so I'm not sure. I managed to rescue some of my old tracks, and I've dubbed them onto digital.
Well, it's amazing. Once it's on eBay, you can get most of those parts still.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's the actual heads or the tapes wearing out. So it's interesting.
I'll have to lend you my demagnetizer. It may be that. So
yeah.
Steve Levine tip there. I have a demagnetizer which I bought.
And then I suppose everyone's got, in terms of my studio.
Yeah.
It's I've literally only just moved in here about a month ago. But it's pretty much the same setup that I've had in all my other studios. And which is obviously, these panels are really good, ghost panels, really easy to put up, and especially that one.
Yeah.
So I've got those dotted around everywhere.
Your sequencer of choice these days, I believe, is Logic, is it?
Logic. So the story continued with this wonderful machine, which is the ASQ10, which is basically the MPC 60, which I still do, obviously, but without the drum pads. So the MPC was that with drum pads, and that was, for me, was a massive revolution. In fact, I did most of my work in the 90s on that, and the first news version of the news scene was done on that, and the single. So I used to use that sequencing on that. Just trying to mute my mic here for a moment. On the Akai, with and just running sort of mostly live MIDI using the sequencer.
But do you find that the transition from using hardware sequencers through to software, I find it really interesting looking at different age groups of people, how they use sequencers. And I think for a generation, I mean, you're the same generation as me, that used a physical tape machine to record the 4 parts, then managed to use sequencers, and now using something like Logic, that journey of how you compose stays with you, as opposed to perhaps a generation that may be only interested in looping something.
Yeah, absolutely.
When your writing process using, the transition between tape through to sequencer through to a computer.
Well, I was really sort of a bit loath to go to computer. In fact, Paul White from Sound on Sound was the person who kept saying, because he used to live in Malvern together, and he used to go, Dave, you've got to use Logic, you'd love it. And so he sort of turned the corner for me. But initially, I was only going to use Logic as the sequencer, and I was still going to run everything live like I'd been doing. And it was also that thing of staring at the screen, which obviously with that, there's no screen. There's just the tiny little LCD screen, which used to fade like... And you could use, you basically knew luckily what you were doing without having to look at the screen, because all the lettering used to fade, and you used to be squinting at it like that, just to try and work out what was going on. But, and also it was more of an endeavor to do things then, because just to get a hi-hat, you'd have to sort of load a floppy into your Akai and sort of find the sound and set it all up in a program. So it's much more of an endeavor to actually get the sounds together and make the music then. It's so much quicker with obviously with Logic and stuff.
It's quicker now, but one of the things I find is, for example, if I have some students here, is that the older way of sequencing does force you to listen to the song from the beginning to the end each time, because it's very hard for those things to go from a moment. Whereas I think one of the negatives of computer sequencing is people don't tend to listen to the whole thing and look at the arrangement as a whole. What was your view on that?
That's right. I mean, it's funny because I was listening back to some of the things that I did on the Juno, because that's all I had to start with,
Yeah.
literally, and it had this sequencer in it. And I was listening to some of the tracks that I put together. How did I do that? I can't for the life of me. I've tried to do it again.
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me figure out how I did it, because I got this like sequencing pattern going through from start to finish, and I thought, well, I must have had the track in my head and known that I was going to swap there to the chorus and go back to the verse there and do all that, because there was no other way of doing it. You literally had to hold the sequence all the way through to the end and literally play it through to the end. So in starting out, everything was done from start to finish.
Yeah. And also the early multi-tracks would only allow you to go from the very top anyway. You couldn't pick it up halfway through. You mentioned in your transition that you started probably one of your most famous pieces, the news, on that sequencer.
On that sequencer, yeah.
I believe you've now transferred those files to Logic. So shall we, for our listeners, go through, why don't you talk us through the files and what you've got on your computer? So everyone should be able to hear this.
So, I mean, a lot of the sounds that I'm still using in the news music have sort of come from those sequencing days in the Acclaimed. So I just basically exported all the samples into my sequence Logic here. So a lot of the sounds are some of the original sounds from there. And so when I got the job, it was all about finding a really distinctive sound that would be instantly recognizable. And in a brainstorming session, one of the things that people were talking about was the pips on Radio 4, how recognizable it was, and instant, you know what it is. And there are all sorts of other things, like we were listening to dance tracks and all sorts of things. And I started thinking, oh, how about the pips with a dance beat, you know? And this little light bulb went on in my head, thinking that could be great.
That's often the thing, isn't it? The starting point.
Yeah, so it was a starting point. It was a thing. I thought, pips with a dance beat. So I got back and loaded up, literally like when you switch the Akai on, or when you switch your EXS on in Logic without anything loaded, you get the sine wave. So all the pip is basically a sine wave. So started off with that, and then added bass drum to it. Started building it up like that with a hi-hat. And then it was a case of bass line. And so I had this idea of, like, I've always loved this sort of I suppose Afro beat bass line, but it's sort of more, it's much more global now. It's doing tap tap doing tap tap doing. So you hear it in India and Africa, South America.
It's on a lot of those African high life records, isn't it?
Yeah, so ding tap ding ding.
Kind of Nigerian.
Sort of that offbeat thing. So I sort of like was playing around with that in my head. So I did that as the bass line, and then some big drums to get the drama going. And then it was a case of adding some chords, and one of the sort of requests was to make the music have the authority and the dignity of the BBC and the seriousness, and also, you know, the obviously you didn't want it to be too sort of you know, that's what it needed. It needed the authority and the seriousness.
Yeah.
And the trouble with, obviously, with any, well, not the trouble with music, but the wonderful thing about music is what you can communicate with chords and subtle changes and things. But obviously with news, you need it to be fairly neutral.
Because you don't know what the hot subject of the day could be. It could be very happy or incredibly sad, like it currently is.
Absolutely. So you can't really have anything too emotional going on. So I just started with literally two chords, a minor chord and a major chord, starting with which both worked over the pitch. So it gives a lovely feeling of minor being a little bit slightly anxious,
yeah, melancholy.
and then the major sounds really lovely and, you know, sort of satisfying. And
How was one of the other requirements for those out there that are listening that are media composers? One of the other requirements is versions. Everybody for every single television and program like that, or even films, but certainly in television, they require a short version, a long version, a version that tails, a version that's ends.
absolutely,
How did you
yeah.
accomplish all the versions?
So from that original, yeah, you're absolutely right. So every show has its own menu of different bits and cut down bits and short bits and long bits. So of course the main bit is the headline bed, which is the bass line and the drum, but filtered down. You don't want too much high end going on because it will interfere with, obviously, with the vocal, with the, you know, the announcer, usually the reader. So you're keeping the high end cut down, and it's just a nice continual. And they have that on. Basically, I've done 4 minutes of that effectively, and then they can trigger it every time there's a new headline. So
because they have like a cartwheel, don't they, to trigger live?
So they can trigger it with. They have it on a thing where they trigger the pictures, and then the music automatically triggers at the same time. So I've got some headlines here.
New plans to shake up welfare. Some unemployed could have their benefits cut. Ministers say the private sector may be drafted in to help find jobs.
So if we try it with music.
New plans to shake up welfare. Some unemployed could have their benefits cut. Ministers say the private sector may be drafted in to help find jobs. 2 more British soldiers are killed in southern Afghanistan. Ming's big speech to the Liberal...
So they can re-cue at any point. But what's quite good about it, when we first did it, they said, can you make the bongs or the booms happen every 5 seconds? And so it was 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3. But then they had to start writing the headlines to fit into that 5-second gap. So it's sort of like the editorial policy of BBC News was all driven around how long they had to write the headlines.
5-second rule.
So we had to find a way around that. So in the end, it was a case of starting with the boom and then just letting the bed carry on, and then they can randomly drop it back in anytime they like. And it's actually quite interesting, because I was a bit worried at first that it wouldn't be musical because it's so random, but it actually makes it sound quite urgent when you do it randomly. So you've been talking like this, and then we do another one, and then we carry on talking for a bit longer, but maybe a bit longer to that, and then we do another one, and then we do another one. And so it's not musical. It can happen anywhere. But it sort of gives it its own feel, which is really good.
Well, while we're on this particular thing, we've got, I mean, I'm looking at the chat line. There's actually loads of questions coming in, but there is one that just come in from Claire Batchelor, and hers is, what do you think of Bill Bailey's interpretation of it? So as you've got it there, you might as well answer that question. So that's Claire Batchelor. Thank you, Claire.
I mean, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's, for me or for anybody, if you've written a piece of music, somebody does something like that, it's a real honor, you know. It's the ultimate compliment, really. And it was really amazing to see. And I remember going to see this actual show live, and when he was doing it, and the whole show went on, it was about an hour and a half, and it didn't come up, and I thought, oh, he's not going to do it. And then right at the end, it just did it as a sort of finale, and it was an amazing moment, that. But actually, it was quite interesting right now on Twitter and Facebook, and a lot of people have latched onto the news theme. A lot of younger people. There's a girl did a sort of rap DJ thing on Twitter, and that sort of went viral. And one of the weather men from BBC North has done this, sort of played the drums along to it, and that's on Twitter. So it's great, you know.
We have also, James Bailey has given us the technology twist by saying it's the Viz Mozart automation that they use to trigger.
Ah, that's it.
Thank
That's the one.
you.
That's the one.
And
Yeah.
we're from radio, so we use the word cartwall. But anyway,
That's it. Yeah.
there's a few other little questions here. So the next thing I'd like you, because the time is just whizzing away, I think one of your next magnum opuses, greatest moments, is the Fun Show. So let me, while you're loading that up, I'll just look at a couple of other questions to see if there's anything that's relevant to this little bit. We've got so many. Thank you very much. There are just so many.
Great.
Lots of people complimenting you and saying they love to see behind the scenes. That's really
Excellent.
very sweet of you. Thank you. So brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, that one. There's someone I think they've got a sort of an acronym for their name, just saying how brilliant it is and how fantastic that the sine wave has become so synonymous with it. Yeah. Hi, Dave.
Sine wave.
Here from the studio in Melbourne, in France. Is that someone you know, Stephen J?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Glad you're tuning in.
Actually, so Nadine Lee is asking just before we move onto it. So when you've got your files, we were talking about the different mix stems and everything. She's asked a particular question. How do you deliver your tracks when you bounce them out of Logic?
I master all of. Funnily enough, we were talking about mastering before we came on, weren't we? But for years and years and years, I'd probably say up to maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't ever master anything that I did, and I used to just give it them unmastered, and I've listened to stuff on TV. I thought, why isn't mine as loud as that track or this track and the other? And that's when I started mastering. So ideally, it would be great to be able to get somebody else to master.
Yeah.
But with TV, it's changing every 5 minutes, and time runs out. And you might master it, and then they'd phone up the next day and say, "Oh, can you just quickly do this?" So it's much better to master yourself. So basically, I deliver the whole thing. I sort of bounce it all down with a mastering strip on the stereo output, on the main output, and I bounce the files down as WAV files, and then just deliver them.
And are you delivering those at 48 or
48?
Yeah, 48. Because again, just for those that know, if you work, as I've just been working on a game as well, when you work on video stuff, it's very handy to deliver at 48 rather or twice that if you're at high resolution. It's just that's the rate of the video. While we're talking about mastering, sorry.
Say one more interesting thing with the BBC is that you don't actually have to do it, but they do have their own level of zero, which is about 11 dBs below normal level, because they use PPL meters.
Yeah.
And
yes, that's true. I have to do that when I deliver the radio show. If it's a pre-recorded radio show, you have a certain threshold. It's the reason for that is, my understanding is, of course, is the transmitters, the broadcast transmitters have a fixed level and they cannot be exceeded.
Right.
They would actually damage the transmitters. So, but while we were talking about mastering, you're absolutely right, Dave. We did mention, because we had an early doors question. This came in literally as we went live. So this is from Dennis Connolly. So Dennis is asking about mastering specifically and wanting us to recommend various methods. So you've mentioned using the options that are in Logic. There are lots of third-party plugins available that do help. If you're a PRS member, there is also the facility. PRS have tied in a deal for members with this service called LANDR, which stands for left and right. So it's LANDR. And that's an online mastering service where you can upload your file and then you get a couple of choices of algorithm and then you can download it. Now, for the free membership, it is just at MP3 level, and it's really designed for songwriters who perhaps want to upload to the BBC Uploader or something like that. It's not really designed for professional mastering, but if you like the way that it works, there is a professional monthly tag you can buy. You get, I think it's, I actually can't remember if it's 10 or so many per month you're allowed a block of mastering.
It was really good, actually.
It is. I've used it myself, especially for listening copies for the band. So, for example, if I'm in the middle of doing something, and as recently I was working with the Vapors, and they were still out on tour when you were allowed to be on tour, but they had like a CD player in their van, so I would master them using that burn them a CD. They could listen to that in the van and check the mixes. And then when we were ready and finished, we went to Metropolis to master the final. So I would recommend checking out Lander, but I'd also recommend many of the software plugins that are available from, say, Universal Audio. And as David uses, the Logic Strip itself has lots of very, very handy things. So hopefully that...
show you my mastering strip if you...
Yeah. So hopefully, Dennis, that answers your question. There are also a lot of professional, if you have small budgets, and I've used this myself with independent artists, there are a lot of professional mastering engineers who will do it online. You send them their tracks and they range from, say, £50 to £75, and they will send them back mastered.
This is it. So yeah, this is my mastering strip that obviously changes per... Can you see that?
You'll have to turn the mic on so that camera goes to the front on your phone. David, turn the mic on and just click it, and then it will go to the front. There you go. Just snap.
Yeah, there's my mastering strip. And
there you go. That's perfect.
I always add like tape. I love a bit of tape sort of on it. They're sort of slate digital. And then
what we'll do, David, why don't you take a screen grab and we'll leave that for the iPhone. They can just put it on there.
That'd be good.
Because one tip was I was told, let's turn the mic off again,
was just to use quite a lot of different software bits, but just add a little bit to each.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. The algorithms that are available in different presets, because obviously it's very hard with presets because you don't know what the source material is. But I think some of the, I designed some myself for Universal. What we try and do with these presets is to imagine what the source material might be like. But what I always advise is take the preset and then listen to your own sound. And then what's also quite handy is, depending on the way your room is listen to music that you like from artists that you like.
That's right.
And see how that compares with your own source. And you can do a very quick A/B. And indeed, Logic has a facility where you can effectively fingerprint the sonic curve of something. So if there's a track, film music or record that you really like, have a listen to it, see what the curve, maybe it's something that's particularly high in the top end, and then you can somehow replicate that with your own EQ. But hopefully that's answered Dennis's question. Are you ready now with your next?
Cool.
Tell us the story of the One Show.
So the One Show was another interesting. I'll just turn the mastering strip off while we're here. Reset channel strip.
We'll get to some more questions afterwards.
So it was when the One Show came up, they didn't ask me originally to pitch because it was so close to the news.
Yeah.
They thought I might make it sound too newsy. So, but in the end they did. And then there were 3 or 4 of us composers all pitching ideas in, and Doug, the producer, had a very, very clear idea of what he wanted the music to achieve. He didn't know what the music was, but he knew what he wanted it to achieve. And the idea was, the show was about people. It was about kicking off your shoes at 7 o'clock at night and the news is over. Let's relax and get into the evening, and that was the whole idea. So it was a real change of gear from the news and that particular hour of TV. So I was throwing lots of ideas. I'll play you a few of the ideas that didn't make it. That was one, and then there was this one. So that was another one. So chucking ideas at the production team, and they go, still, it sounds all right, but it's not quite got the thing that we wanted. We wanted to say people. So, at that point, you're sort of like, I've got to get this. I've got to get this, and so he revs you up. And so I got to a point where they were so sort of keen to know how it would work at 7 o'clock in the evening. I thought, what I'll do is put a mock-up together, audio of 7 o'clock on BBC One, and I'll tag my music on the end of it. So I laid a bit. This is what I did. There's starts with the news. You're sitting watching TV at 7 o'clock.
Safety on holiday. Travelling abroad may come at a price. Get the real story tomorrow at 7:30. Now on BBC One, Watchdog.
And then I just sort of come in with my idea, you know, so they can hear
How
imagine how it would be. And they went, oh, that's great. Oh, that's really helped. You know, so tell you what, we'll stop pitching. But you can do the job, but you still haven't come up with the idea. And then Doug said, there's this tune I really like the sound of. Can you do something like that? So let's see if I can find it. Got it. Oh no, I've got it here. Hang on, I'll play you. So it was, this one.
Would you go to bed with me?
Which hopefully people might recognise, and it was called Would You, and it was a single that came out in 1998, and I said, that's me, I did that. And he went, that's fantastic. Oh,
that's a great piece of serendipity, isn't it?
Yeah, it was incredible, you know, and so he played me that as a guide, and he said, can you do something like that, but it's got to be about people, you know. So I kept thinking people, and then of course the most blindingly simply obvious idea, people. Well, let's have people then. And so choir, and I thought gospel choir, sound. And so I started with a gospel choir sample that I got, and it's literally just a chord, which is a lovely sort of...
Had they at that point told you it was called The One Show?
Oh, it was called The One Show then.
Right, so you knew that it was called The One Show from the very beginning.
So I loaded all my lovely sort of trumpet sounds up from Would You, and because I played them, Jim, the trumpet player, jammed a whole load of jazz stuff, and I chopped it all up into little morsels, so you could play it on the keyboard. So I sort of came up with a new little tune, you know, catchy melody, and just combined that with the choir. So it's the choir, you know, the trumpet, which Doug liked, and then the voices. And then that was the sort of core idea, and it was just building on that, adding the drums, bass line. And then I did piano and chords underneath, and I was working on some major chords, and I had this lovely guy Will who was doing some work experience with me at the time. He was only 16, and in fact he was from our I'd done a talk at one of our kids' local schools when they were younger, and he was one of the pupils at the school when he was about 8 or 9, and he said, as soon as I heard you do that talk, all I ever wanted to do for the rest of my life was just do music. So he came back and did work experience with me. He might be watching now, actually, but he brought his guitar, you know, and I was sitting doing these, and he was listening to this, and he said, well, why don't you try these chords, which are not so major, slightly more suspended chords, you know, which made it sound really nice. So we kept that in, and Will's actually on the guitar on The One Show now, so he was quite chuffed with that. And so yeah, built up to, got it to that level, and played it to the production team, and they just went, yeah, that's perfect, but can you make the voices a bit but we love the voices, can you make them a little bit bigger maybe, or whatever. So I got some session guys around, gospel singers, and to my little flat in London, and stood them in a little circle, and I played them the chord, and they said, can you sing that? And they just said, yeah, do you ever got any words? And I just went, well, go one, try one. Went, one, just as simple as that. And
you're on Logic to do this at this point, though.
Yeah, I was on Logic then. Yeah, so
presumably the previous version was predating Logic. What did you use for the original recording?
For the original single,
record version, yeah,
that was the sequencer again. and it was all, like I said, sampled up, and I used to chop all the samples in the Akai and then put them on the keyboard, and so he could play all his samples.
For our younger listeners, God Almighty, it's just so much easier now. I remember chopping those.
It's so doing it that way opens up so many other things that you play that you wouldn't do. So. So you can just, you can find little things that you wouldn't normally do. So it's a good way of doing it. I still do it now, that technique.
So while we're on that, and we're talking the transition, let's do a couple more questions. So there's a question here from Stephen Lang stuff that says, this is to both, so you answer first, same question. There's two studios in front of you. One is full of classic analog gear, a quality analog console, but no digital equipment. The other studio is full of the most expensive cutting-edge digital equipment and software, but no analog gear at all. You have to choose which studio to go in and spend the rest of your career using this to make records. Which one would you choose, David?
I suppose it would have to be for me, the software studio. I know that sounds a little bit, because it's, I think, because I do so many different styles, it's not just analog synth. It's sort of, orchestral, jazz, and the digital factor opens up so many different possibilities, in terms of the sounds. But I'd always use my ideal studio is obviously using that and then supplanting it with live musicians wherever possible. So
yes, and of course that question fails to say that the very first point of analog entry would be a microphone, and although there's digital microphones, the capsule itself is still capturing an analog signal. I guess my answer would be almost the same, because the trouble, as lovely as analog equipment is, the maintenance costs and the reliability factor are very difficult. The negative of software, on the other hand, is when there's software updates and you can't load in something you did before, which is really a strange thing that's happened more recently, whereas only a few years ago, the compatibility between various software revisions meant you could transition from version X to version, whatever. I've been having that recently where I loaded an old song and I couldn't load it in because the files just wouldn't play back. Fortunately, I kept one of my older computers, opened the song on that, and then actually bounced the tracks out of it and put it in. But I think, it's a great question, Stephen, but obviously there's no direct answer. I think a hybrid of both is the way forward.
I mean, I've got a load of some tapes in the next room that I did on it because I had an ADATs for ages as well. Those, and when I moved house, it was like, shall I keep them or shall I get rid of them? And my wife was like, get rid of them.
Next question to you, David, and to me is from Austin Noble. So he's got a couple of questions. The first one is to do with mixing, and it says, do you ever use smaller speakers to test? I certainly do. In fact, although you can't see them because they're next to my monitors, I've got my original Oratones from the 80s, and I've got the Avatones, and I even use a hi-fi amp. So absolutely, always check your mixes.
Yeah, I've got
my
my big Genelecs at the back there. Got these little Genelecs at the front, and then I've got these little Yamaha just as a third option. So it's always worth checking.
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. Also, part of Austin's second question is, do you break down the stages of, this is to you, break down the stages, so i.e. music composition, sound choices to tracking, mastering, or is there a blur between them? So I guess in terms of a daily workflow.
No, I mean, it's all rolled into one for me. So I sort of tend to sometimes even mix with the mastering on to check it, and I sort of mix while I go as well. So when I'm adding new bits, I'm sort of mixing at the same time. So when I've finished writing the track, it's pretty much mixed already. So the mixing for me happens when I'm writing it at the same time.
Same from that person, Nadine, that said an earlier one, but just adding to that, just saying, you know, when you supply it to BBC, do you give them stems as well? And when you give them stems, do you have the effects separate?
The BBC, not so much for title music and brand ident music. They pretty much just have it as it is. But for library music and for more incidental music for shows, they more and more they ask you for the stems now. So, but for mainly it's usually just the stereo.
You half answered this earlier. So this is from Nick, doesn't give his surname. Just saying the difference between the plug-in synthesizers versus an actual one. So perhaps you'd elaborate on that, because you've shown your lovely Juno.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, I have got the plug-in version of the Juno, and purely for convenience, I mean, I tend to find that I probably use the plug-in more than the real thing. That's more just for sort of doodling around and finding things. And but in terms of the recording and using things when I'm writing, it's just way more convenient to use the plugin.
I think that's the truth, isn't it? That the plugins are very quick and easy. The analog devices do have an edge, but in my experience, I think the edge often comes from the signal path. You know, maybe I'll do more of that next week when I do my in the studio, because I can explain a few more of those things. There's one from Dan McGrath, who is...
Hey Dan!
So he's just recommending, and I would concur, this is to do with the mastering, Isotopes Ozone. That's a really...
Oh yeah, I've got that.
A great suite of plugins for those that...
Brilliant. Yeah.
And in fact, I use Isotopes RX for a large number of my radio things, because, for example, very recently, Radio 2 reran my Beatles documentary, and I had a really great interview with Sir George Martin, and there was a clip I couldn't use, because just as we were finishing, there was a lorry, a dustbin lorry, and it was going beep, 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 beep in the background. But with Isotope, the latest version, I was able to get rid of the little bleep within the audio and save what was a really jolly clip. So thank you, Dan, for reminding us.
Yeah, Isotope's really good.
That's a great product for those that haven't. What else? God, there's so many questions. It's just fantastic that we've got so many questions. I mean, I'm literally scrolling through. So who hasn't? James Burrell, or Burrell. Hopefully it's pronounced correctly. This is to you, David. How much music do you write in a given week?
How much do I write in a given week? It depends what's going on, really. I mean, I'd say I was talking to somebody about this the other day, actually, and I sort of thought, well, actually, I probably, from sitting down and when I bought that keyboard and got it out of its box, set it all up, I've probably written pretty much like a tune a day, or a different piece of music every day for the last 38 years or something. So I'm pretty much doing something every day, and at the moment I'm doing this really nice little library thing, which because one of the things I've always enjoyed doing, and maybe it's been one of my things that I'd sort of find quite easy to do is catching melodies, and
well, in fact, that leads on to another question from Sam Beckett. So he's saying, do you find it difficult to create new and distinctive themes after creating hundreds over the years? So that rolls into that.
It's not difficult. I mean, it depends. You'd be the audience are the judge of that. You know, it's fairly easy to come up with new ideas. Whether they're any good or not, it's another matter. But this little library thing I'm doing is quite good fun, because I'm doing like retro tunes, because I do, probably everybody goes around with their with their phone, you know, and you think of a little melody, or
Yeah.
I wake up with a little tune, go, da, 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 ba, ba, da, da, ba, and they're a little bit like sort of 19 sort of old-fashioned theme tunes, you know, retro, really cheer. And I thought in the current scenario, you know, if I'm ever anxious or whatever, then I always start thinking and humming tunes, you know, it's always a thing. So in a way, this is like part of that. So I'll play you a couple of little ones here, just as
So these are work in progress.
yeah. So I'm pretty much doing one of these, a new one every day. So with, I don't know if Nick's on. So they're like little cheerful little tunes.
So you have these as a kind of like a memory bank of ideas that you can then either.
Yeah, so I've sung them on my my phone, the melody, and I've just basically just got them down onto Logic, and I've got Jim the trumpet player remotely, and Vo the guitarist, and I just send them the MIDI file, and they'll. So they're all like little. This is where
little ditties.
little ditties. Yeah, so slightly retro feel.
And that leads on to another question.
And quite simple as well. So warm and friendly, and sort of hum.
So you've almost reverse engineered. So a couple of people have come up with the same, which is, are you ever given footage to work to? Because you've just said little ideas. So there's about 3 people have asked that question.
I mean, yeah, very. I mean, that's been part of, you know, probably much staple part of how I've worked over the years.
If you've got footage, how do they deliver the footage to you? How do you work to the footage?
Well, it used to be obviously on VHS or whatever it was, but now, of course, they can send it as a QuickTime. And the wonderful thing about Logic is literally you just drag it into Logic, and it just pops up, and then you can just then it comes up as a, you know, separate little track at the top, and then you can just work from that. So when you scroll forward and backwards in Logic, the video scrolls back and forward with you. So it makes life really straightforward.
Do you prefer to work to picture, or do you prefer, as you've just explained with those little ideas, just that they're a vapor idea that one day you put into your phone and then you transcribe it down to Logic? Which is your preferred option?
I love both, really. It's both. They're both really satisfying. I mean, working to picture is really good. It's very enjoyable to do and satisfying when it all works. And when you do it over and over, you can sort of, you start to get a feel of the tempo when you watch a cut. And obviously, because the editors have got a tempo in mind that they're cutting to, even though they might not be cutting to music. And quite often you can watch something 2 or 3 times, then you start to think of a rhythm and a beat, and then, you know, when you sort of think, oh, that's 150 BPM or whatever, and that's order, and then you put it against that rhythm, and you suddenly find that clicks are dropping into place at the beginning of bars, shot changes are happening in the right place. You think, oh, that's, and then so it gives you a lot more ideas about what the music's going to be, and the music's actually driven by the visual, and so that it's quite good fun to do.
And that would roll into another question from Esther Gale, who's talking more actually to you, David, about so if you've got a piece of footage, are you then creating a surround mix? Do you do surround mixing?
Not usually, no. I mean, I did some for Chinese television just before Christmas, and one of the stipulations was a surround mix. So I got all the stems together and went to another studio to get those done. So because it's so rare to be asked to do that, that I'd rather just go somewhere else. And it's also a bit complicated because they said we want it's 5 point, and they said no, we want it 6 tracks. And
6 or 7.
And then there was this whole thing about Dolby encoding, and I couldn't figure that one out.
I know, you're absolutely right. I think that I've done a fair few myself. I mean, I have a DM2000 in my studio, which was designed for surround. It has a joystick and everything. But you're right that there's the specialist companies out there. So what I tend to do now is I would create the stems knowing where they would be in the picture. But then, as you quite rightly say,
leave it to
commands, especially with the encoding. And also the levels are really, really crucial. So I think in those cases, it's absolutely better to go to the professional studio. And also, if you're asked to do surround, chances are there's a bit more of a budget. And so therefore, it makes sense to go to a third-party specialist. Because if they're doing surround all day long, they kind of know the levels. And as you say, there's the difference between 5.1, 6 or 7. And also balancing everything, because even when I've done it in my studio, you have to have the rear speakers set up properly. You have to spend at least a day with a noise generator to make sure the levels are correct. So it takes 2 days just to reconfigure the studio to do it properly. It's quicker to do the stems, work out what you want to do, and then, because if you get it wrong, it can be horrendous. I did a session at British Grove once, which I did do as surround. Luckily, I was able to test it beforehand, and when I mixed it first of all and tested it, it sounded horrendous. And it was a really quick learning curve, because this was an early 13 channel thing, and just simple things you forget as a producer. Like a thing like there was a shaker, for example, and it sounded like it was swimming in water, even though because of the way that it was in the encoding. So I think to answer that question, it's scrolled up and I can't see. Oh, Esther. Then if you're in the position to do it, Esther, then I think, as we're both probably saying, is probably go to a professional surround mixing studio to have it done properly with the client, because obviously the client can. There's, what else have we got? Still loads coming in. Thank you so much for all these questions. Ellie Parker is asking, if you're starting as a composer, what equipment would you recommend, which is both affordable and effective? Over to you, David, as
well, I suppose Logic or Cubase are probably the things to go for to start with.
Yes.
Especially, I mean, I don't know much about Cubase because I don't use it, but Logic, if you just buy the package, you just get pretty much.
Worth noting, actually, David, with the, one of the things at the moment with everyone working from home, Apple have actually unlocked Logic Pro for 90 days free of charge. So actually, one of the things you could do, Ellie, is download, if you're on a Mac, is download Apple Logic Pro and see how you get on with it, because you've got 90 days to try with it. And also, I think going back to Dan's email of Isotope, I think they've unlocked, or there's certainly some extended demo times on a lot of software, because a lot of people realize for the first time there's another generation of people working from home that don't have access to professional tools. So for example, Moog have given you the mini Moog free of charge on your phone, which works really well. Wow. So do check out various forums, because there's quite a lot of free studio equipment available for the next 90 days. It's a great opportunity to learn something, and also if you like it, then of course you can get on board with it.
So what are the tips that I think Paul White told me when I started with Logic is, when you switch it on, it's so daunting because there are like a trillion ways that you can do everything. And so the best way to start is to just work out very slowly what you want to do, because you don't have to know everything about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No.
They give you so many options to do something.
Yes.
It's finding your way with 2 or 3 of the options and then building it from there.
Now we're nearly at the end. I'm getting a flashing warning from the Ivers that we're really nearly running out of time. So there's another question, last couple now.
No problem.
Roberto, I can't pronounce your surname and I don't want to embarrass myself. So Roberto, his question is, what's your dream synthesizer? Money, no object. Go out and purchase straight away.
Wow. I suppose my favourite one that I've had, I suppose, was the Virus. Mm-hmm. I had the Virus.
Shame about the name in the current climate.
I know, yeah, that's true. The rack mount I had.
Yeah.
And, The access, wasn't it? Access, yeah. So, yeah, I know it's not quite the right thing in this current climate, but I think that was probably, if I was going to go out and buy one now, it would probably be, I'd probably get one of those again. Yeah.
Well, my dream synth is continually expanding because I'm loving the current climate with modular synthesis, and that allows you to work with small companies who are often soldering in the back of their garden, but there's some really unique stuff. So I'm really enjoying the return to modular. So Roberto, there's your two answers. I think we're getting right near the last seconds now. We may even be out of time. So thank you all for watching and enjoying it. Thank you for the question. I'm so sorry that we couldn't get to all of them. I mean, it was fantastically flattering to see so many brilliant questions and so many of them. We had so many attendees. So thank you very much indeed.
Great.
And David, thank you for being a marvellous...
I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed it. You need to go and see your studio next, Steve.
Well, next week, Wednesday next week is a reverse. So it's my studio and Chris Hawkins from Six Music will be hosting as I'm doing. So the reverse of that. These are continuing every week. So next week is me with Chris Hawkins. But thank you, David, for today.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe.